Hold on. I just need to have the little timer. Yeah. All right.
Wait,
Okay.
you come at me for not being prepared or taking too long to get started with the recording, and now you gotta set up a timer?
Shall I play my
Roland.
little rooster that I have? Pump myself up a little bit and make the
You
tough
are
guys out.
killing me. Oh gosh. Welcome to our last episode where JM dies at the end.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we've met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, J.M. Erlinson.
Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. In fact, I was doing even better up until like 5 minutes ago when for some reason it started to explode snow from the sky outside my home. So over the course of the preparation for this episode, we have gone from, I don't know, a nice spring day to in the middle of winter again, I guess. I don't know, man. It's
So
crazy.
does it
How are
does
you
it
doing?
mean does it mean I have to do the show today because you're outside snow
Uh,
shoveling? Is that what you?
Listen, if it cuts out in the middle of our recording, you'll know what happened. One of the power lines must have fallen on my on my balcony. My goodness. So let's get this over with quick. No, I'm just kidding. We are going to have a really good show today. I'm really excited
Yes.
about it.
Yes,
We
we do.
we
And
are
now,
we are really poised to revisit a topic that it's been one of the most popular topics, at least in the viewership we've had of the show. And boy, it's still something a lot of people are really confused about. So, Roland, when we last talked task mining, what
Mhm.
were the outcomes of the show that you got? Like, what was the sense coming out of it of completeness? Did you understand what you needed? Were you ready to go? Did you feel like you could challenge the market and achieve what you wanted?
is I'm confused and proper answer.
It's a maybe from me.
I
I
I
like the
think
episode. I thought it was good, but there was more to
yeah.
do.
I think it's a contentious topic, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that we have with a guest today on the show, Tuhin, who is working with, I don't know what other words you can put in. He's the
Founder of?
founder of Mimica, who's a task mining provider. And I'm pretty sure, Tuhin, you have obviously all the fancy AI stuff and whatnot in there that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But welcome
You
to the
bet.
show.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much
Hooray.
for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, we're glad to have you.
And we like to know a little bit more about you before we get started with like the work parts. Roland likes to ask the questions about the person behind the mask, but why don't I start with that? Tell me a little bit about yourself. What got you to where you are, and sort of your professional history before we get into the personal stuff. Like, why do you have a love, a fascination with task mining, and what are you doing professionally about it right now?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I was born in the Bay Area in California, so surrounded by startups and technology my entire life. Definitely a product of my environment in many ways, and have been starting businesses since I was a kid. So this is one in a long line of endeavors, let's say. But Mimica really started when I met my co-founder, Raphael, who came to me with a brilliant technical idea, which is that you could automate repetitive work that people do on their computers using AI. So the idea is that AI can watch what you do, learn from it, and automatically execute the task. And so the technology that we've built around task mining was initially in service of this automation vision. We figured if we could deeply understand what people do on their computers, we could then replicate those tasks. And that has taken us on a journey to really understand click and keystroke data and be able to make predictions about what people are doing while they're working and why.
Yeah, but before we get to this, obviously, um, our audience wants to get to know you a little bit better. So can you talk a little bit about you as a person? What are you doing? What your hobbies are? What you like? What your bucket list items are? All that soft and fuzzy stuff that's not technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually an English major, a little surprising fact about myself. So my dad was a writer, my grandfather was a writer, and I was a creative writing major in college. So I spent a lot of my time writing short stories, poetry, I was always building technology in my spare time as well, but in my spare time, I like making things, playing music, doing creative type of stuff.
Ah, that's something we share, my friend. Creative plus technology, isn't that a nice combination that brings a little bit of spice to your life? So that's cool. And Roland did mention bucket list. Like before we all kick it, what's your number one thing you want to have?
The number one thing I would like to do, although I'm terrified of it, is cave diving. So
Ooh.
exploring underwater caves while scuba diving, it kind of scares me a lot, but that's also what's exciting about it. So that's one thing I'd really like to do before I die.
I can tell you from literal personal experience, it is very fun. And I want to get us to our topic today because we really want to dig into this. You mentioned starting from the perspective of automating manual tasks, and for a lot of our audience, you will recognize that kind of falls into the realm of RPA. Normally, people talk a lot about that, and people somewhat understand that. But as you back it into that, as you back into the discovery side of things, tell me a little bit about the your perspective on task mining, the history of what task mining is as a technology, where it came from, and why it's relevant today more than ever.
Absolutely. So the idea behind task mining, in my opinion, is that there's a tremendous wealth of information that's locked into click and keystroke data. These are the fundamental operations into a computer, and they're the measure of all the digital work that's happening in the world today. And yet, businesses and people have no idea how time is being spent. So, when you think of task mining, it's the ability to turn this click and keystroke data set into a wealth of information. And truly, it's the advances in AI that have unlocked that ability. The state of the art, really, in task mining was sort of uh, telling you how much time people spend in different software. So it would say, okay, this person spends 20% of their time in Excel, 30% in Outlook, the rest in the browser. But what you can do with task mining today is you can get a really accurate measure and trace a process from end to end. And that's something that couldn't be done before. The reason it's critical today is because uh, businesses are trying to do more with less. They want to be as efficient as possible. And the number one line item on most business P&L is the wage, right? And so you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in wages and you have no idea how this money is being spent. So if you want to make the work more efficient, if you want to make the people more productive, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And task mining is the way to finally measure this really critical part of most people's day.
I'm really curious, and we will talk about that a little bit later, um, how you actually pull that off. I'm not sure if I 100% buy into your if I buy into your promise, but I'm open to be convinced of it.
Roland the
Um,
Doubter, as he's called.
We love to
yeah,
turn skeptics into
yeah.
believers, so I'm happy to talk about that.
Talk a little bit about not the secret sauce, but the semi-secret sauce. We spoke briefly about AI. You obviously do have competition out there, and no names shall be named, right? Um, and I've worked with a couple of them. They look for documents, structures. They do green screening and all that type of stuff. Tell me a little bit about how your approach is different, if it is different.
So the fundamental input data into Mimica is click, keystroke, and screenshot data. So
Hmm.
every button that someone um, enters on their keyboard, or every mouse click, every screenshot that represents an action that the person takes, this is the fundamental input into Mimica. And then we use statistical methods, machine learning, to make predictions about what these sequences actually mean. So does this reflect an invoice processing? Does this reflect, another type of task? And then we merge these sequences together to create this process map. Um, it's a little bit of a different approach than others take because, process mining, for example, use logs from ERP systems. So if an invoice gets submitted, one log will occur in SAP as a result of that. But the true process behind that log is much more complex. The invoice is downloaded from an email. The data is copied to a spreadsheet. It's routed to a manager for approval. That approval comes back through a Teams message. Finally, it gets put into SAP. So that can be a 20 to 30-minute process that takes place. And there's a tremendous amount of information there that process mining would not capture.
I see that. And we've actually, Roland and I have come across this exact issue a few times in some of the work we did together, where your process mining tells a story with some sort of conspicuous gaps. And those conspicuous gaps are, in our opinion, a lot of the places you find the value. And those conspicuous gaps are also where the risk creeps in. And so it feels like this is a great way to break open those black boxes and uncover what people actually do. But when you look at industries or specific roles and functions, where do you find a lot of your clients are highlighting those conspicuous gaps? Where are they calling out for the need for something like what you do with Mimica?
Well, fundamentally, what we do is instantly capture, map, and optimize the process. And the need for this optimization occurs in many different business units. Now, very common ones for us would be finance, shared services. Within shared services, you have finance, operations, HR, IT, many different types of processes that are occurring in that shared service center. And these are our horizontal use cases. Think finance, shared services, customer support, that sort of thing. Now, over time, we've learned that in specific industries, there are actually are vertical use cases as well. For example, in the insurance industry, you have claims processes. So one of our customers has 4,000 claims agents. They're spending $240 million a year in wages on claims, and they have no idea at all how that time is being spent. So they use Mimica to identify what are all the different activities within claims. Then they establish these productivity benchmarks for how long each activity should take. We find the automation opportunities, we find the inefficiencies and bottlenecks, and we generate the detailed process maps that business analyst is going to use to improve that process and monitor it on an ongoing basis.
It's interesting to me here because I actually say this to customers a lot. What you're doing conceptually is as old as time, which is you're seeing what people do in their jobs. You're trying to figure out how to make it better. And you could do that by watching them over the shoulder or sitting with them. But it seems to me like task mining as a practice is about adapting to scale. So it's impossible to do that with not one person, but 1,000 people, and with observational bias. It's impossible to look at things without necessarily causing those things themselves to change, particularly when there's people whose livelihoods are on the line. And so tell me about the story that you sell with this kind of technology to senior executives that makes them believe that this is a worthwhile investment, particularly like right now when budgets are often quite tight.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. What you're describing is the traditional way of process mapping. And some of our customers call them uh, shoulder surfing or desk rides, where you're essentially standing over somebody's shoulder. And surprisingly, they even have a stopwatch and a notepad, and they're timing the
Yeah.
time in between the steps. It sounds archaic, but it's the modern way of doing things still before task mining came along. Now, in terms of what senior executives care about, a lot of times the CFO, let's say, has some cost cutting initiative. Could be, let's say a $500 million cost savings initiative. And she goes to her team and says, okay, I need you to find $500 million in cost savings for me over the next year. And the team says, great. Um, where do I start? And they have absolutely no idea where this savings exists. So that's a toehold for Mimica to come into that organization and say, look, at the click of a button, we can identify every inefficiency and every automation opportunity in your department. And you don't have to pay McKinsey $10 million to come in. You don't have to deploy an army of business analysts who are going to spend, thousands and thousands of hours and probably years to do this manually. And for the reasons that you described, JM, it's not going to be accurate anyway. So what Mimica can do is at scale and high precision. We can tell you every process improvement opportunity in your business unit.
So I'm still not convinced, by the way, just to say that as a disclaimer. Again, we still have time.
Skeptic versus
Um,
optimist.
what is if I would be, so you have your pitch, you sold me on it. What does it take to bring it in? All right, is it a deployment of little agents on everybody's desktop? Is it a whatever central, however, surveillance stuff you do on laptop? What is the technology behind? If I buy into this, what do I have to expect?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I'll start by saying that we anonymize all the data that flows through Mimica. So there's
Hmm.
absolutely no confidential or personally identifiable information. Now, everything that you do within Mimica starts with a recording project. You could think of it as taking a snapshot of a team or a process, a sample of their work over a period of time. So let's say 2 weeks. We don't leave the recorder on and on, continuously monitoring the individual. It's like a camera, a Polaroid camera. You take a snapshot and it takes about a couple of weeks to create that snapshot. So what you would do is within Mimica, you choose the individuals that you want to include as part of this sample. And it's typically people that are doing similar work. So let's say an accounts payable team. So the recorder gets installed on the accounts payable team. The recorder has only 2 or 3 buttons on it: start, stop, and pause. And once you start the recorder, you can pause it at any time. And then at the end of the 2-week period, and really while the recording is happening, all of that data is being processed, compared, crunched in order to produce the outputs that you'll see, if you were to open up the Mimica dashboard. And essentially what that is a list of all the tasks and processes being done, a ranking based on how automatable those tasks are. And then from there, you can bring it into our tool that constructs a detailed process map that contains all the variants, exceptions, steps, and logic in the process.
So I have a specific question with this because I wanna dig into one of the things you said, and it plagues me a lot, which is how to identify that a certain sequence of activities is associated with the same process. So let me give you a good example of like somebody who has to handle a bunch of orders in like a procure to pay process. And they're going in and they're copying the code, the item code of what they want to buy. They're pasting it into the request form that they have, and they're getting an email confirmation. They're copying in the approval into their order system, pay, or like maybe they're taking the PDF and they're uploading it into the system and they're hitting submit over there. Like there's a bunch of manual activities. How can you tell that when somebody went to their email system and opened up a different email, something that required they go to PowerPoint, like work on a deck for somebody else, that they're not part of that process anymore? First and foremost, how do you harmonize things around a central stock of functional? And secondly, how do you track from end to end the length of it any given like purposeful built process run? So from the beginning to end of this like procure to pay process, when I finish my submission, how do you do both of those sorts of things?
Yeah, great question. So if you were to, let's say, take a picture of a dog and upload it to ChatGPT and say, hey, can you tell me what's going on in this picture? It would be able to tell you, oh, there's a dog and it's playing fetch and there's a tennis ball and it's sunny outside and the grass is green. And it could give you a lot of information about what's going on. And similarly, if you take a screenshot of a claims agent and you take a screenshot of the work that they're doing of their desktop and you give it to a model, um, not ChatGPT, but a proprietary model that we've developed, we can tell you this is a claims agent and they're working on a claim and it's an adjustment and the vehicle is a 2018 Hyundai Sonata and this was the projected damage and this is the claim ID. All of that rich information can be extracted from the screenshot. And as the screenshots are changing, we can make predictions about how the work is changing over time. Now, the models that actually predict, what is a process, they're a little bit more complicated than that. But at a high level, the point is we're reading this unstructured information and we're extracting from that structured information about what is the work that's being done.
how do you deal with accuracy issues? Like, that's the question of, like, where do you see either the models? I mean, I don't want to talk about hallucinations because I think that's not necessarily accurate or relevant here, but how do you check the model's assessments of things? Like, where does a business stakeholder or influencer validate the predictions of a model like that, or is that no longer relevant or necessary?
So we actually do that validation. So we have a QA team on the back end that checks all of the predictions where the confidence is below a certain threshold. So the model can actually not just make the prediction, but it can make a prediction of the confidence around that prediction as well. And if the confidence is below 95%, then we show it to someone on the back end and they will make an adjustment or a correction if needed. And that correction actually feeds back into our machine learning pipeline and will improve the confidence around that suggestion in the future. So that's a critical part of the way that we operate because businesses are taking very important decisions based on the process maps that we generate, the inefficiencies and automation opportunities that we identify. So it's critical for us to have, 98% accuracy in the output.
Yeah, that's a good point because you've done your recording, you've done all the magic that you just described in the back end. What is the thing that a client then gets? Is it a process diagram? Is it a dashboard with performance metrics? And what do your customers then do with it? Or is it, can they do additional analysis? Or is that just, oh, here it is. We think you should do this. End of story. What is that experience that a customer then has?
So it's really a three-step process. The first is a high-level discovery, which identifies what are the tasks and processes that people are doing and where are the inefficiencies and automation opportunities. So on an accounts payable team, they might be doing 12 different tasks over the course of the recording period. So Mimica will identify those 12 tasks, how much time is spent in each one, and it'll say, hey, these three you can automate with RPA. These two are not ready for automation and they need to be standardized or they need to be simplified in some way. And and then this one is, that needs some serious work, essentially. It's not ready for even for standardization. So that's in a dashboard. Then what the customer will do is say, okay, this one that's a good candidate for RPA, I want a PDD of that to give to my automation developer. So from there, you can bring that into our process mapping tool and it will construct a detailed process map that has all the steps and logic in it for the RPA developer. You can make changes to it if you want to, and then you can bring that into your RPA tool of choice. So for example, you can export directly from Mimica into UiPath. Now, the continuous improvement journey doesn't end there because business processes, like everything, are subject to entropy and they're in a constant state of decay. And if you look away for too long, they will become more inefficient over time, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so what we do is then we help customers monitor that process on an ongoing basis. Could be monthly, could be quarterly, and they can compare, is the process improving? Is it conforming to the new standard that was set? And in that way, we go on a continuous journey with that customer as they iteratively improve that process over time.
That's fascinating, and I love that their business process in a constant state of entropy. And I think you're right. There are so many pressures that face organizations, and business processes are quite the lever that are it's available to you to meaningfully improve your business operations, how you do business, how you automate business, how you challenge the market, how you beat expectations and succeed. And I want to turn this back to our audience because you all work in business in some capacity. What are some manual tasks and activities that you still see within your workday that feel like they really could be automated? And what challenges have there been in discovering those opportunities and seeing them realized in something like process automation? So, where could maybe you use task mining? We'll leave you for a moment to think about your business life and come back with our second section, the challenges and the triumphs.
And welcome back. Tuin, thanks for all those explanations. I think we need to talk a little bit more about it, but I'd like to switch the topic slightly. And I hope we get to this because in our little break that we just had, you had a nice quote that I obviously want to have on record um, in here, um, which I really liked. But maybe to come back to the outcome or to the process, you know. So if I understood it, you record with the um, allowance, the admission of the users, you record what they do. So they have a button on it. But there's obviously the big challenge of, oh, Big Brother is watching me. You know, it's the surveillance state. And I think tech gets a bad reputation these days because they try to harvest your data left and right, you know, and now I have to do the same at work. I don't want this. So talk to me a little bit about how you avoid that trap, because that could be obviously a killer for everything you do if the people just don't press the button, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, what we see in practice, first of all, in terms of the value that Mimica creates, is that maybe 15 or 20% of the work that you're doing can be automated. And it's typically the work that people hate doing the most. So, every person in every company, if you go to them and ask them, what would you rather be doing with your time? There's always something that they would prefer to be doing that they're not able to be doing because they're stuck doing some repetitive and manual work,
Expense reports.
like expense reports. Exactly. So what Mimica offers is a way to rid yourself of that manual work that you don't want to be doing. And this, I truly believe, gets people excited to participate in Mimica. They see it as a path to kind of ridding themselves of the work that they don't want to do so they can spend more of the time doing the things that they would like to do. Now, on top of that, we give the person a lot of control over what's being recorded. So the recorder has a pause button on it. You can pause it at any time. And to be honest, we see about 5 hours of recording per day. So it's not a minute by minute play by play of everything the person does over the course of their day. We like to say that it's a process management tool, not a performance management tool.
Yeah, I think that part of this challenge comes with establishing a culture of trust. And that starts by explaining your intentions. Now, you say things like process management, not performance management. And I love the pitch. We automate what you already hate. That's great. But in this corporate culture, this climate where performance management is a big topic and people are worried, and you said earlier that a lot of the cost of these organizations is workforce, and people are quite worried, frankly, about their jobs. How do you make clear your intentions for the organization? How do you define the intentions? Make clear those intentions and then earn the buy-in not just of executives who your promise is savings on workforce, but rank and file who are absolutely necessary for the information you're going to use to eke out those benefits.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately it's about transparency, being really open
Mm,
in our communication about what we're trying to accomplish, sharing the outputs with them so they're aware of what the outputs are going to look like. And
mhm.
if you log into Mimica, you'll never see an individual and how fast they're working or something like that. It's always in aggregate, so you can see what the team is doing in aggregate, you can see how the process is performing in aggregate, and you can identify in general and on average the things that could be eliminated to make the work more efficient. So when people see that and they don't see their name tied to anything specific, they realize that this is a way to identify inefficiencies in general. It's not being kind of targeted at me, but it's really for the team's benefit. And that helps us get buy-in across the group that this is something that's going to ultimately help them.
Okay, I tend to believe you, Tuhin, you know, but now you recorded everything, and I see the anonymized dashboard. Where do you store my data? Right? What happens with that? Does it go through the uh, electronic garbage machine after it was anonymized, or what do you do with those recordings? Where do they end?
So the recordings typically end up in Mimica's cloud, but keep in mind that that's after they're completely sanitized, and any confidential or personally identifiable information is stripped out of the recordings before they're written to the database. So this is crucial because we are dealing with very sensitive data. We work with banks, financial service companies, insurance companies. We're interacting with um, financial information, social security numbers, dates of birth, really sensitive data. And when we work with hospitals, we're even dealing with EMRs, electronic medical records, and historical health data. So it's crucial, absolutely crucial, for all of that information to be stripped out of the recordings. And we go through rigorous third-party assessments with all of our customers, where they assess the anonymization framework. They look deeply into our architecture. We do live demos to show the anonymization in action, and that gives the organization ultimately confidence that we are an organization that really cares about the customer's data and protecting it.
Can I ask a terrible question? We might cut this because it's dangerous. And I think about it a lot, and I think that our listeners do too. The technology that you and companies like yours. Now let's move out into your industry, away from Mimica to companies that do task mining. With less regulation, fewer guardrails, and more widespread acceptance of surveillance, corporate surveillance, the technology, correct me if I'm wrong, has the capability to process unanonymized information. So if it was not required for you to do so, do you see forward looking a world where there is a shift in what's acceptable to capture and that this unanonymized information becomes a more targeted capability of organizations to address performance challenges and to address repeatable patterns in their business operations with specificity, even at a cost of privacy?
I don't believe so. And I'll give you a little bit more detail on this. We've designed our algorithms to trace the flow of data from one system to another without analyzing the data itself. So we're
Hmm.
operating at a layer of abstraction above the data. And we do that intentionally because we're not interested in the data at all. It doesn't matter what the person's name is, it doesn't matter what the date of birth is or the social security number is. All we need to know is that the data went from this system to that system and some transformation was imparted on it. And being able to trace that transformation and the flow of the data, that's all we need. And we have a policy of recording the absolute minimum information required to do our jobs. And that's not something that we plan to change.
If I was a customer, and I'm not saying you should make it super public, but if I was a customer, I wanted to have a look behind the scenes, do you offer them that and say, look, this is how the sausage is made?
Of course, absolutely. And many of our customers do ask to see what that data processing pipeline looks like. So we're very open about the way that the outputs are created. And also, now we're getting into the nitty gritty a little bit, but all of the data that we collect is owned by the customer. So even though we're processing it and producing some outputs, it's not our data. It's owned by the customer. They can delete it at any time, and it's deleted at the end of the term. So this gives them complete confidence that they have control over what is recorded and when.
Yeah, that makes sense because to JM's points a little bit earlier, I think trust is the key thing here. It's an easy sell to say, hey, we're gonna do process mining, and there's event logs, as you said, and it just says, oh, Tuhin created a purchase requisition. So what? That doesn't mean he used so and so long, and by the way, he watched a little video in the background and did his banking business on the side, whatever. That's obviously not there. So it's an easier sell to say, yeah, we're just looking at the event logs. We don't care about your YouTube video that you ran in the background. That's different for task mining. That's why I said I'm not really convinced, and I asked those questions. Um, but you also had a point a little bit earlier. I think it was an outbreak, so I hope you can repeat it again. Um, Task mining is obviously, I don't know if it's obviously, task mining is currently aimed toward computer jobs, white collar jobs, because you see what people do um, on their computers. Where do you see the future of this? Because when I think about it, I work with a big aircraft manufacturer who has a little bit of a bad reputation these days. But they do obviously build those big birds, right? And there's a lot of manual labor and riveting and whatnot. And I mentioned also I have a little soft spot in my heart for manufacturing processes, how things are done. That's obviously not a computer job, right? So where do you see, if you have your crystal ball, in the future, and it might be in 6 months, 5 years, or 20 years, you know, I leave it up to you. Where do you see the future of this type of technology go? Because I like what you said, that it's a process management tool, and processes are everywhere, and people need to understand what they do. So what's your outlook on the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting question. And certainly there's a lot more for us to do just in the realm of digital work. But it's true that there's a tremendous amount of non digital work out there, physical work, where there are also a lot of interest from business in making those operations more efficient. So you could think of the input data today into Mimica as being click and keystroke data. These are the fundamental actions that are performed on a computer. In the same way, you could imagine in the physical world, the fundamental data being actions that people take in real life. So, of course, it's a bit more complicated because there are many different actions that someone could take. So, in a warehouse, they could lift a box, they could move it, they could be from one location to another. And we would probably be taking video recordings of that and translating that into a sequence of actions and then using that sequence of actions to feed into Mimica. And now we don't need to take actual video. We have screenshots and clicks and keystrokes, but ultimately it's a sequence of actions that are being fed into our model. So this could be an interesting extension of the work that we do in digital work, an extension into the physical world.
Yeah, because ultimately you're taking a log of activities. How you get that log is kind of up to the technology deployment, but what you do with that log is you create processes from it. You intuit where those processes are weakest and how you might change them in order to improve how they work. And I think that's really cool, to see that as a forward-looking capability. But now I want to give you an opportunity because I know that you have a lot of experience with this. Let's take a look at where success has actually come. And we had a little chance to chat beforehand about some case studies on things that have worked. But give me a couple of examples of where your customers have achieved their specific outcomes and goals they were looking for, and that task mining as a discipline and a technology was the difference maker.
Yep, absolutely. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier that we have an insurance customer that spends $240 million a year on claims. And what they did is identify these productivity benchmarks for each of the activities within the claims department. And those benchmarks enable them to, for the first time ever, measure what are the processes that are being done, what are the tasks, and how long do they take. Now, off the back of those measurements, we're also identifying the automation opportunities. We're also identifying process improvement opportunities and a couple of the transformations that they made, just to give a flavor of them. Within the first 6 months of using Mimica, they launched 16 RPA bots. These were net new bots that did not exist before, that they were able to identify and automate those processes using Mimica. So that was point number one. Point number two, and I thought this is pretty interesting, is they actually own the case management system that processes each of these claims. And so they were able to make modifications to those systems using insights that were gathered from Mimica. And I'll just give a quick example of this. When there's a car accident that involves a tow truck, it turned out that those claims in particular were taking 30% longer to process than the average claims. And it was due to some inefficiencies within that source system. So they were able to use Mimica to identify that claims that involved a tow truck were taking 30% longer. They were able to root cause it to understand the part of the system that needed to be improved. And then they actually launched a new version of that system that simplified that workflow. And they're able to reduce that time down by about 80%, getting it closer to what a typical claim processing would look like. Um, so that was a really interesting one because they were actually doing A/B testing with Mimica in a way, where they launched a new version of the website and they were able to compare the performance before and after. So the total aggregate savings for this customer was a 20% reduction or $48 million in savings.
Well, that's
That's
sick.
great.
Boy, you don't charge them 48 million for the software, do you? I'm
No,
kidding.
but we probably
It's
should.
good ROI, I think.
Yeah. But this sounds all good. Yeah, and I don't want to belittle this by no means, Tuin. Um, I'd be curious, maybe on the not so happy side, where do you see problems coming up in projects? Or to say it in a more positive spin, if you had your druthers and you had your ideal customer, what are the things that a customer should prepare before he or she even gets started with task mining?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, keep in mind that we've been in business for 7 years. So now we've been working on edge cases for the last 4 years or so. So we've by now resolved many of the difficult challenges. I think one, just to give a flavor, one that we worked a lot on last year was multitasking. So in certain parts of the business, you have very high levels of multitasking. Imagine a customer support person that's working on 6 or 7 tickets at the same time. There's 6 or 7 chat windows on the screen, and they're waiting for a response on one and doing some work on the other. So this is an example of one of the more challenging use cases for task mining when you have a high level of multitasking, how to de-interleave that data, and understand each of those cases separately.
Mhm.
So that was a big area of research for us last year.
But that is technology, and I appreciate that you're doing this for quite a while. I, Mr. Customer, for me, it's the first time. You know, I was wondering if there are things that you encounter, like, uh, technology security. Get your IT OPSEC people in tip-top shape, or do change management with your people, that you don't scare them away and you build trust. These type of things. So what can I, as a new customer, do to prepare things to make it a success? What have you seen as the good, bad, and the ugly in your implementations?
Well, before we even do a proof of concept with any customer, and we always do free POCs for all of our customers. But before that proof of concept comes to life, we always go through a third party risk assessment where the organization takes a detailed look at our architecture, they look at our security documentation, and we work even with the big four banks. So you can imagine that over the years we've dramatically improved our security posture to be able to handle very sensitive data. So I wouldn't say that that is, a blocker at all. In fact, we've got an entire team that their entire job is only to work on these InfoSec documents. So we've gotten very good at answering those questionnaires. The one thing that we recommend is reviewing the documentation that we have around, messaging for Mimica. So some of the things that we talked about earlier, how to talk about Mimica to your team, how to communicate about the value, how to communicate about the recording. We have documentation around that messaging, and that's always good to review before you embark on a large scale deployment with Mimica.
Well, we want to see that people are willing to get on board, not just organizations, but the human beings behind the screen, the ones that frankly drive the success of a task mining solution. They're the ones you're watching. They're the ones whose ideas, tacit ideas, will contribute to a better way of working, and they're the ones who sometimes their behavior and performance needs to find a better process to work with. And I wanted to turn this back to our audience because what you're hearing right now, you know, think about the automations you have in place today within your organization. Are they covering your end-to-end process entirely? As we said, automate the work you hate. What is still struggling? And what sort of innovations could be driven within your organization by uncovering and emerging those as part of a task mining initiative? And how might you even get started? We'll leave you for a moment to think about that and come back with our final thoughts and conclusions for the episode.
And welcome back. Hey, Tuin, very interesting conversation. I have to admit, you moved me a little bit with my skepticism. So if that is a win for you to take away, it's all good. It's all good.
I will sleep
But
well tonight. Thank you.
but obviously, there might be more listeners and watchers out there of our little show here who might have the same feeling, right? And say, "Oh, I was a skeptic, and Tuhin moved me a little bit. I like to learn more." So my question to you is, how can people reach out to you to start that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easiest way to reach us is through our website. So that's mimica.ai, Mimica.ai. Come check us out, sign up for a demo. We think you'll be really excited by what you see. It's a very cool technology, if I do say so myself. And even if you're not interested immediately, come check out the demo at least and see what's possible. I think it's one of those really cool instances where AI has unlocked a new potential for process improvement. So for any business analysts in the audience, definitely invite you to come see what can be done.
I love it. And we invite you to come see what it's being done also on whatsyourbaseline.com. I know. This is a great episode. Tuhin, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation, both about the technology as a discipline and the way that you look to implement it and the success you've gotten. And I hope that our audience really enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, please come leave us a like or comment on the posts or send us an email at hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. Any number of interactions you can take that let us know that you love what we're doing and you want us to keep doing it. This has been a really fantastic time. And I'm excited. You can go to whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 88 for more on this specific one. But until then, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
I've been Tuhin Chakraborty.
And I am still Roland Bolt.
As always, and we will see you in the next one.